Hi, I'm Madeline Winter and I'm a parent coach and hand-in-hand parenting instructor based in Sydney in Australia and working with parents from little ones through to teenagers all around the world. I'm really pleased to have you with me. And today I want to talk about consequences. These can seem really tempting. We often reach for them when we're feeling frustrated and things aren't going the way we want them to go. And especially as our kids get older, it's tempting to think that because they're bigger, that their capacity to plan things, to hold in their mind what might happen if they actually do something, um, and to be able to be reasonable and remember things is greater. It's greater because they're bigger. And the truth is that, a 15-year-old does have a more developed prefrontal cortex, which is where that kind of planning and abstract thinking can happen. They are more able to do that than a 4-year-old. But fundamentally, what makes a 15-year-old tick is much the same as what makes a 4-year-old tick, which is that they can function well when they have a really deep sense of connection. And when they're not functioning well, it's because that sense of connection has broken. And that's the thing that we need to tackle at the point where we're often reaching for consequences to mete out. And I think that consequences need to be understood as a limit setting exercise. And frankly, the longer I've done this work, the clearer it is to me that limit setting is right in the middle of parenting. And getting this piece right really helps to get parenting right, full stop. It's not some separate thing. So, what is it that's wrong with consequences, with this way of thinking about the challenge? I think there's four main things that are wrong with it. One is that they don't work. Two is that they're based on a confusion about where our child's mind is at, and I'll talk a bit more about that. Three is that by the time we're reaching for consequences, we aren't in the best shape often, and that's not a good place to be working from. And the fourth thing is that consequences are an exercise in general of power and control, and we need to do that very sparingly in our relationship with our children. So, number one, why don't they work? Well, the research is there's some debate, but there's definitely research that suggests pretty clearly that people who to back up a bit, I think the issue of consequences is on the spectrum of rewards and punishments. And that's how they need to be understood. And all of them are in the same category and have the same challenges. And human beings, broadly, the research sort of divides motivation into two types. One is intrinsic, the things that we're internally motivated to do, and the other is where there's external motivation, which is an extrinsic motivation. And rewards and punishments are in the latter. And the research suggests that offering extrinsic motivation, rewards and punishments, actually decreases a person's interest in doing something for themselves. So after the reward is gone, the motivation to keep going with something is sometimes less than it was before you started. And there's also research to suggest that if you offer people rewards to do jobs, they actually do them less well than if you hadn't offered them a reward in the first place. So, there's at least an argument that they don't work. I think The second point is that when we're reaching for consequences, we're reaching for our child's, what I would call our child's thinking mind. And here I like to make a distinction between a thinking mind and our feeling mind. So we're hoping that our child will remember and understand that there's going to be a consequence. And the problem is that by the time they're up against that, they're not in a place where they can generally remember or understand or care really about the consequence. They're not in their thinking mind, which is the part of their mind that can remember. They're in the part of the mind that's flooded with feelings. And that's why when we talk about limit setting, we often recommend that you try to bring a limit using 5 words or less, because you don't want to be trying to have an argument with your child. You simply want to be bringing a limit. And I'll talk a bit more about what happens when we do that. But one thing we don't want to be doing is appealing to reason. After we brought the limit, and what happens is there's an upset and the feelings that are driving off track behavior get dissolved or dissipated, that's when a thinking mind re-engages. And I think sometimes we start talking about consequences because we have this sense that what we want to do is teach a child a lesson. And again, that's hoping that their mind is in a place where it can absorb that lesson. And frankly, what's motivating and running a child's behavior at that point is not their thinking mind, it's their feeling mind. It's a bunch of feelings that are driving off-track behavior. The third thing that's problematic with consequences is that by the time we've got to the point where we're offering them, where we're reaching for them, we've actually lost, we're in our feeling mind. We're frustrated, we're angry, we're upset. And there may be perfectly, understandable reasons for that. But when we're in that place, it gets in the way of using the kind of warmth of tone and approach to build the connection that we're going to need to build with our child in order to be able to set limits effectively. And when we're cranky and angry, it's really difficult to dig deep for the playful approach to problem solving. And often around issues where we're reaching for consequences, playfulness is a very useful tool to have in our box. Having fun around swear words in a period of time you might call special time, which is a special play time, and getting children to laugh a lot about that is often way more effective than telling them that they shouldn't do it. In fact, probably our experience, plus I read a piece of research that suggested that, the more that we tell people not to do something, the more interested they are in doing it, the more preoccupied they are in doing it. So we need to get to the point where we're not in our feeling mind. We need to go somewhere and talk about how we feel, get a bit of a break, and just get to the point where we're not so triggered. We're often triggered because it's reminded us of something, some way limits were set when we were younger, and there's a way we sort of pull up what happened to us and run it out. And it's not what we want to be doing. So we need to go, we recommend listening partnerships, but we need to go and get some time out for ourselves. I actually think the only thing time out is useful for is for parents. I'm not sure our children need time out, they need time in. And the other thing about consequences and punishments are that they are an exercise in power and control. And there are times, I think, when we are going to need to bring a strong limit. And that's necessary to keep things safe. But we want to do that sparingly, because every time we move in with that kind of force, really, we use up credit in our relationship with our child. And if we do that too much, we basically run out of credit. Things just really snarl up. So we want to save that for the times when we really need to do it. And when we do end up in that place where we're needing to move decisively against something, or provide a limit that's really important, we need to make sure that we have times in our relationship with our young person where things are going their way. The most efficient way of doing that, in my experience, is special time, where you have a designated, timed, announced playtime where you tell a child, I'll do anything you want to do. It's amazing how it builds a sense that you're on their side, and that balances the times when you have to move in and not be on their side. At least that's how they perceive it in that moment. They usually will come through it and be okay with it, but you want to use that very carefully. And, as our kids get older, there's fewer places where we can really control what's going on. So we need to be focusing on connection to move things along. So rather than reaching for consequences, I like to think of these challenges as limit setting opportunities. What happens is that when people aren't able to do what needs to be done, or to have things, do things that make things go well for everyone, we call them off track. And in general, we go off track when we've lost our sense of connection. And connection is the grease that smooths the wheels of family life. It's what makes things go well. And when things aren't going well, there's not enough of it. And when we bring connection warmly enough, and limits effectively do that, if we're not mean and harsh, if we just use a few words and we clearly state a limit in a warm tone of voice, sweetheart, you need to sit in your car seat. Honey, I'm not going to let you drive the car. So either the way we bring the limit will give enough connection that a child can get over whatever the difficulty is and move forward. And that's where playfulness is particularly useful. Oh, I'm not going to let you do this. If I catch you, I'm going to give you a raspberry. And a small child will run. In fact, I have quite a big child and she doesn't mind that sort of thing still. So either we bring ourselves warmly to the challenge, or and things go well, or it allows an upwelling of feelings. Because those feelings that come up, that upset that comes up when we bring a limit, that's the feelings that are driving off-track behaviour. Those are the feelings that are keeping a child in their feeling mind and not able to access their thinking mind. So we need to bring limits to keep things safe, and we need to bring limits to pull up feelings. And when we do that, we need to expect the explosion of feelings. And sometimes with, any kids, but, with older kids, that can be pretty physical, can allow for a fair bit of stomping around and loud words. That, if we can not take it personally, if we can listen it through, will often get us to the point where we can at least have a conversation about what's going to happen. And somewhere along the line, if we can get back to playfulness and warmth and being together in a way that goes our child's way, the combination of those things is going to have us able to get things done and have our children able to do what needs to be done without sort of reaching for harsh consequences. So till next time. I look forward to spending more time with you soon. Bye.